In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
You might remember Memphian coach Bill Courtney from the Oscar-winning documentary Undefeated. Now, he's got an awesome movement and podcast called An Army of Normal Folks that you can check out at normalfolks.us.
I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian, and welcome to The Sidebar, a weekly show on the community, arts, culture, and more. Today we're talking to George Abbott about the Reimagining Civic Commons initiative. So stay with us for a conversation with George. George, thanks for being here.
Happy to be here.
So you, George, most people probably know you if they know George Abbott from your time at Memphis River Parks Partnership. You were communications chief of staff.
I was director of external affairs.
Director of external affairs. So we quoted you a lot. You and I talked a lot as you were going through that whole process. But as of 9 months ago, give or take, you started at the Hyde Foundation.
Yes. So now I'm the director of communications for Hyde Family Foundation.
Okay. And I should disclose at the top that Hyde has been a supporter of the Daily Memphian really almost from the beginning. Actually has also done some donations for WYXR where the podcast also airs. But right, you're here now in kind of this role about the Reimagining Civic Commons. So let's do the 30-second. What does it mean to the Reimagining Civic Commons? Then we'll go deeper into it.
Sure. So Reimagining Civic Commons is a program that really poses the question, how can you create an engaged, resilient, active, and vibrant city? And proposes that the answer to that is to reinvigorate your civic commons. And civic commons really refers to all public spaces. So parks, libraries, trails, plazas, even streets, all of the spaces.
All that.
The spaces that we share together. So the thesis is that, if you can invest in those assets in a strategic manner, they can generate tremendous outcomes across a whole range of disciplines. So community cohesion, economic activity, civic engagement, and environmental outcomes. So Civic Commons kind of gives you that framework to reinvest in the Civic Commons, measure your successes, and learn from them and go forward.
And we've done tons of shows and articles in Daily Memphian, back to the old Daily News, behind the headlines shows on Sidebar about these kinds of things, very essential, medical district, green line, bike lanes, like all that kind of interrelated stuff. We were talking before we started about the Cossett Library, and we've had Keenan, the head of the library system, on and talk about it's not just books anymore, to say the least. Books are hugely important, but there's all this other connection and stuff going on. A lot of it, though, I think it's interesting. I mean, you articulate really well. Your former boss and your friend Carol Coletta articulates it really well. It's hard not to think of Tommy Pacello, who was one of the first people, and I always say this, but I always will, who exposed me to this notion. And Tommy was so good at saying it's kind of like, and he said it better than this, when you see it. Because you enjoy being there. You actually want to stay there, whether that's a sidewalk and you're going to have a cup of coffee and talk to a friend or read a book, or it's a path you want to walk on. It's just these public spaces that you want to be in and not think hard about on some level, right? I mean, that's a bad version of what you said.
And it's, as we've kind of moved into a digital age, it's become much easier to opt out of public space. If you can afford to, you can buy your books on Amazon. Yeah. You can get them delivered straight to your Kindle. You don't have to leave your house to get a book. 50 years ago, you had to go to the library or you had to go to the bookstore. If you can afford to, you can get a membership to the country club. You don't have to go to the public park anymore. So, over the past 50 or so years, we've seen this kind of retreat from public, and associated with that has been a rise in distrust, a rise in kind of, people believing that, or a decline in kind of the fabric of community. And you have to work really hard to kind of build that back up, because it is so easy to stay at home and to, live in the digital world.
And part of the digital world is you can feel really connected through social media and the various attendant ways, through video games. I mean, I remember when my son was younger and started playing video games online, and I'd be like, why aren't you playing with your friends? He's like, all my classmates are in this game right now, Dad. Like, I'm literally talking to, Austin and Gabe and whoever as we all are playing and having fun together, but they're doing it digitally. There are pros and cons to that, but it removes people more from public spaces. Again, the video games and all that sort of digital, when you talk about the digital life, and it's not to say all that's bad form of connection, but also it kind of supersedes a lot of these things that you're talking about.
Well, and I think the other thing is the types of people that you interact with.
Sure.
Right? Like, you tend to live in a neighborhood that is, roughly of a similar economic level, similar types of background. Where you work, you are working with people, usually, depending on where you work, but usually you tend to interact with people who are at a similar level to you, right? And so and schools, the same kind of thing. But it's really important for, I think, to be exposed to people from different backgrounds. That's how you help to kind of build community bonds. Because if you don't see someone else who is having a different experience from you, you don't understand what their life is like, right? And it's a really big ask to, and we've seen that, especially when you think about economic mobility for lower income people. We've seen that they benefit from sharing schools, for example, with people of higher incomes too. It provides a better opportunity to make it to a different social class. But it's really difficult to integrate schools. There was, of course, the Supreme Court decided to integrate schools 60, 70 years ago, and we still see huge stratifications in schools. It's really difficult to integrate neighborhoods, to have mixed income neighborhoods. You see when low income housing is proposed, or even when apartments are proposed, there's huge pushback from homeowners. Whereas public spaces is somewhere that you can actually bring people together. You think about a place like Tomley Park or like Shelby Farms Park, you can go there any time of day and you will see people from all walks of life inhabiting the same space.
And it's true. I mean, we're here recording in Crosstown still until our new studio is built. And I happen to live here. And this is also, I mean, there's the private spaces of the offices and of the residents, but then we're kind of in the semi-public space. And it is like that. I mean, it is this kind of notion of, which was part of their vision, was that it would be an open public gathering place that is tremendously diverse. I mean, just for the people here, I mean, there's high school, there's people like me who live here, there are different range of offices, there are people coming in for restaurants, there's people just coming in to wander around and kind of get out of the rain or get out of the hot weather. And all that makes this place really interesting. It's part of the reason I've stayed here for as long as I have, because you get all that just outside your door.
Yeah, and it, like you said before, it's a feeling.
Yeah.
That it feels vibrant, it feels exciting, it feels like somewhere where you want to spend time.
So we're here. Let me remind everyone, we're here with George Abbott in this role. He's with the Hyde Foundation now. You may know his name from when he worked at the Memphis River Parks and the Tomley Park and other initiatives down there. We're talking about the Reimagining Civic Commons initiative. So let's get sort of specific to that for a second. About that came out of the Knight Foundation. You were at the Knight Foundation. Carol Collette was at the Knight Foundation. One of a number of cities that got funding. So kind of what's been funded in Memphis that's through that very specific initiative? There are many other things we've talked about, but let's go back to this particular initiative.
So the grant program started back in 2016, and there were 5 cities that were, cities all across the country applied to be part of this initiative to receive the funding. Memphis was selected and received $5 million to really focus on the Fourth Bluff area of the city. So that's River Garden, what is now Fourth Bluff Park, Cosset Library, and the interstitial spaces between those. And so you can follow the arc of the process, because the first step was to create some pop-ups to see if there really was a base of people, a desire to use these spaces, and those were the River Play pop-ups. Using the data we gathered there, when we saw the reaction, we reinvested in River Garden, and then Fourth Bluff Park, and then a couple of years later, Cosset Library opened. So that was the initial round of investment, focused downtown on the river.
And there was other funding for those. This was part of like exploring, initiating, seeding the ideas, and just lots of people came together with Cosset. There was a ton of public money and some of these others. But keep going, right? Is that correct?
Yes. So the initial kind of seed grant was from Civic Commons, and then there was other funding too. Every one of those projects we measured the successes that we had, and I think River Garden is a really good example because prior to its renovation, it was receiving single digits number of people per hour. And we saw attendance go up, I think, around 300%. Even more exciting than that, when you actually looked at where those folks were coming from, it was a demographic snapshot of Memphis. We had people from different races, different incomes that mapped to the demography of our city. So building on that success for round 2 of the Civic Commons, we kind of expanded the net to incorporate other organizations across the city, other public spaces. Overton Park joined, the Heights CDC, Building Memphis, and essentially they agreed to a way of working. So a way of working that prioritized the outcomes that we want to see in Civic Commons, that measured successes, and that published and was transparent about those successes and those challenges. And we've seen, great projects come out of that. Not solely funded through the Civic Commons, but things like the Heights line, which just opened phase 1. Some of the planning work in Overton Park, some of the educational programs in Overton Park. So there's been a lot of great stuff.
We'll come back to that again. We're here with George Abbott talking about the Reimagining Civic Commons initiative and all kinds of peripheral things off of that. But let me take a moment to remind everyone that this is The Sidebar. I'm Eric Barnes. The Sidebar airs here on WYXR 91.7 every Thursday at 11:30. It's focused on the community, arts, culture, everything in between. But it's not just a radio show. It's one of many weekly podcasts we do at the Daily Memphian, including the Memphis Grizzlies podcast, hosted by Chris Harrington and Drew Hill, our food podcast, Soundbites, hosted by Jennifer Chandler, our Tigers podcast with John Martin, Parth, and Frank. All of those are available as podcasts wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. And this show and Soundbites, hosted by Jennifer Chandler, are also on WYXR and available through the WYXR app or the WYXR website, wyxr.org. You can get archives of those shows. You can actually get archives of all the WYXR shows, music and talk, if you go to WYXR. If you're not a supporter of WYXR, it is nonprofit, listener-supported radio, so do consider becoming a member. You get all kinds of benefits. You get kind of free stuff that go with it, or you can do a one-off donation. Donors and members are what supports WYXR. And if you're not a paid subscriber to the Daily Memphian, it is a nonprofit, and it's the largest newsroom in the region. It just celebrated our 6th anniversary since launch, so do consider becoming a paid subscriber. We are still here with George Abbott talking about Civic Commons and all things sort of these public spaces. It's been interesting. How long have you been in Memphis now, actually?
I've been here a little over 6 years.
It's only 6 years?
March 2018.
That's
so
kind of
and a half.
I mean, that's an intense 6 years between.
We've done a lot. Sure.
I mean, in between the launch of Tomley Park, all the drama and difficulties, and now it's open, and the events are happening, and daily, and big events and small events, and just people wandering around. COVID, obviously, in the middle of that, and all those complications. It is interesting to me to talk, and I brought up Tommy Pacella, but even going back to the. Going back, I don't know, a decade and more, like the Green Line starting, and I lived here and people were like, that's going to be terrible. No one's going to use it. It'll be a crime-ridden, pathway to destruction. I mean, just like apocalyptic predictions of the Green Line, which was one of the things that begat all this other stuff, these connections. And that can work. And then Shelby Farms can work. And then Overton Park, which I was, full disclosure, on the board there early on and for quite a few years. Which saw the same kind of numbers you're talking about, where there were the people who loved the park, but it was not necessarily the most welcoming, most comfortable space to be in. And then to make some small and then big changes, bike lanes, The Wolf River, I don't think we've talked about, but the connection.
Sure.
Hyde's been involved, just full disclosure, involved in most, if not all, of these various initiatives. The Memphis 3.0 planning and Greenprint. It's a pretty remarkable transformation in attitude of these things won't work, can't be done, and have no value, to now, there's fights about certain things, but they don't remotely compare to what was going on even 10 years ago, let alone 15 or 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I think COVID was an interesting time, right? Because I think it created a sense of value in these public spaces that maybe wasn't there before. But I think, I'll say a couple of things. One is that I think when you seek to disrupt the status quo, there will always be opposition, right? And, everything you mentioned was really, somewhat of a radical idea. The idea of the Green Line, like, let's create this not a road, a pathway open to everybody. Like, it was a pretty radical idea at the time. And
right.
So you will, there will always be pushback to that. And I think if there is no pushback, you're probably not trying to do something interesting enough, exciting enough.
Yeah.
And the other thing I think that you see is each of these projects has a harder and harder job to do, because they are, like I said at the beginning, you're competing with digital entertainment, you're competing with paid entertainment options. And to generate a public space that has the same level of quality that you would expect to find at a private space is hard to do. Like, I will never forget when I gave a presentation to the mayor's Mayor Strickland's I think weekly cabinet meeting. I forget exactly what the meeting was, but we were talking about River Garden, the successes at River Garden, and the lady from Memphis Animal Services, so this was a few directors ago, put her hand up and said, I was at the park the other week having a picnic with a friend, and it felt like a country club. There was a ranger. It felt like a country club. The ranger there came and said, "Are you okay? Would you like me to put this umbrella up?" And it's like, that is the level of service that you've got to accomplish if you really want to compete with these private spaces, and that is hard to do. Yeah. But you have to do that because you do not want public spaces to be an option of last resort, right? Yeah. Like, there are people in our community who cannot afford to go on vacation, right? Like, their vacation is going to the park. But if they are the only people there, then you're really missing an opportunity to build community in that space. And it's a higher lift. It feels a little politically incorrect to say it, but it can be a higher lift to get higher income people to that space as well.
Yeah, it's also interesting too. I think, were you at this thing that New Memphis put on recently that Barbara Hyde?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. I didn't see you there, but I was in the back. And it was about green spaces and public spaces, and folks from Nick Walker from the park was there. Director of Park Services, whatever the formal title is. Barbara Hyde was obviously there talking about some of the stuff that Hyde Foundation has funded. Billy Orgel was talking about not so much public spaces, but the way the buildings and apartments and so on that he's done and redeveloped tie into and rely on and benefit from all these public spaces. One of the things that came up that's interesting, that a lot of these ones we've mentioned involve a conservancy, a lot of private funding, again, Hyde Foundation, but other foundations locally. And Nick Walker from the city park department just said, look, we don't spend enough, compared to our peer cities. And that was a humbling thing. I mean, he talked about all the great stuff they do, and I think they've done incredible improvements over the 10, 20 years that I've been around the parks and covering this stuff. Big improvements have been made. Accelerate Memphis, the big funding project that Strickland administration and the council put more money into a bunch of parks. They're not all, but they can't all be reliant on a dedicated conservancy, right? The way Overton Park, the way Shelby Farms. And you lived some of that, right? I mean, you've been around it. So, like, what's the answer there in terms? Is it just simply, well, more taxes? More tax money?
I mean, that's a great question, and if I had the answer to it, I'd probably be, But I think there are different levels, right? Like you look at the POG system in Memphis, and we have these kind of regional attractors, which I would say are the major conservancy parks. So the Riverfront, Overton Park, Shelby Farms Park. People have no qualms about spending half an hour in the car to get to any one of those spaces. You come from all over the city to get there. And then we have neighborhood parks as well, which kind of serve a slightly different function. And I think what's interesting is the more that you can look at neighborhoods and try to find those public spaces that are between neighborhoods, that are on the seams of neighborhoods, those are places where you may get, you can kind of build some of that community between different people. Because they are accessible from different places. But there is and it's hard. Like we don't spend. Nick is correct, and of course he's going to say we don't spend enough. But it is true, right. We don't spend enough.
And we spend a lot less compared to peer cities. When you say park, I think he does it on acres of park per resident or
$1
like
per resident, I think, and we're doing pretty well for the sheer amount of parkland, just because we're such a large city. We're so spread out. But in terms of investment, we're lagging behind. Now, I will say we've made a lot of improvements the past couple of years with Accelerate Memphis, with some of the other initiatives that Nick has brought in, some of the work that Jamal is doing at Bloom. And actually this year we achieved a pretty significant increase in our park score. So we overtook Nashville. That's something to celebrate.
Yeah, who was the associate? I'm putting you on the spot, but there was a really legit national
Trust for Public Land.
Yeah.
So every year this
is not some empty survey that shows up in your AI generated thing. This is a really legitimate.
They do a very so I know because I completed the survey on behalf of Memphis River Parks a few times, but they do a very robust survey of how much money are you investing in capital, how much money are you investing in maintenance. How many playgrounds do you have? How many basketball courts do you have? All of these things. And they ask every city around the country. And then they will give you a score based on a number of factors, investment, access, equity. And so this year, thanks to Accelerate Memphis and some of the other investments that conservancies have made, we took over Nashville, we took over Louisville, I believe. And while we are still kind of middle of the pack, we're not exceptional, we're making progress in the right direction. Yeah. So that's exciting.
Just a couple minutes. One question. How did you come to this sort of work?
That is a great question.
Would you have to do in 30 seconds or less?
So I began my career in political organizing and have always been passionate about kind of building a more cohesive and a more equitable and a better society. I found my way to this public space work really through Carol Coletta. Working at Knight Foundation, I had the opportunity to see a portfolio of 26 cities across the country, to work on projects in each of them, to build stronger communities. And that was what brought me to Memphis, because I saw the opportunity on the riverfront with Tom Lee Park, and now I'm privileged to be able to carry on that work at Hyde Foundation.
But one more question before the last question. I've never asked you where you're originally from. You do not have what one would call an American accent, but I've never asked you.
So I was born in Chicago, but my parents are British, and we moved back to London when I was 6 months old. So I grew up in the UK and came back to the States after college.
After college?
Yeah.
Okay. And because there's a whole different level of public spaces in many European cities, London, certainly parts of London included. And does that sort of, it's a much more walking, much more mass transit friendly. It's just a different, not that there aren't cars and lots of cars and so on, but it is a bit different.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because I trace back kind of my origin story of being interested in public spaces from when I was a teenager. and I lived close to a park, and I used to go play basketball at the park. Most kids in England were playing soccer for whatever reason. Me and my friends decided to play basketball, and playing basketball on that court, there were kids from all different types of schools, schools that we didn't go to, that we would never have met otherwise.
Yeah.
But what was really exciting was that the basketball court kind of sucked. It was falling apart, and together we were like, well, we would like to have a nice space to play in. And I don't know if we can take full credit, but the kids of the basketball court kind of wrote a letter to the council, please, can you fix this surface, put up some goals with nets, etc. And they did it.
Yeah.
And, that was my first experience of we can actually make a difference if we just try a little bit,
Yeah.
And so, I saw that and now that court is still there. Hopefully they've reinvested in it since then.
Yeah.
But that was a formative moment for me.
Yeah. Last question I always ask people, what was the first concert you went to?
The first concert I ever went to, I believe it was Green Day, which is a pretty good first concert.
Pretty good. Yeah. In the UK?
In Wembley Arena.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's definitely a first there. We may have had a Green Day. I don't know. I don't think so. Natalie's shaking her head, but definitely no Wembley Stadium. So there, you win on that without a doubt. So, George Abbott, if people want to learn more about this, can they go to, is there a website?
So civiccommons.us is the site for the national initiative. It has details on all of the cities, participating cities, what they're doing. Yeah. Okay.
That's all the time we have this week, though. George, thanks for being here. Thank you all for joining us. Do join us again next week. If you missed any of the show today, you can get the full show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, the Daily Memphian site, or at WYXR. Thanks, and we'll see you next week.